dear friends. Good evening. How was your day today? I bet you're ready to relax after a long day. Let's take a moment together. Take a deep breath. Relax your body. Like and subscribe to support us. Share your mood in the comments. Are you ready? Let's begin tonight's stories.
It happened during my second month of mandatory military service. In March, when Taiwan was transitioning from winter to spring, the weather was unpredictable, warm one day, cold the next. Our company suddenly experienced an outbreak of influenza. What started with just a few soldiers running fevers quickly spread, and within days nearly 20 of us were sick. That was almost a quarter of our company gone. At first, the captain wanted us to isolate in our barracks, but the medical officer warned that keeping us all together would only make things worse. Eventually, they decided to move all of us who were sick to an old building at the edge of the base. The building, it was 2 stories tall, painted white, but the walls were weathered and cracked. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and the iron gate creaked loudly when it opened. It hadn't been maintained in years. Our sergeant explained that it used to be the base's medical facility, back before they built the new center. Now, it was just a storage space for old equipment. "You'll stay here until your fevers break," the sergeant said, pushing open the rusty gate. "The first floor is too moldy, so you'll stay upstairs. Medics will bring mattresses soon." We were led to the second floor, a single large room with windows on both sides. But most of the old shutters were stuck closed, letting in only slivers of light. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, which was odd for a building abandoned so long ago. While arranging our beds, my friend Ming and I noticed something strange. On the backs of several mattresses, someone had scribbled messages in messy handwriting. "Ghosts here. They do rounds at night. Beware of the senior officers. Inspections. And the one that chilled me the most, don't look back." We laughed nervously, trying to shrug it off as some kind of prank. But deep down it unsettled all of us. That first night, perhaps because of the cold medicine, everyone fell into a deep sleep. The room was eerily silent, so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. I woke up around midnight feeling the urge to use the bathroom. Moonlight filtered through the broken shutters, casting pale beams across the floor. As I was about to get up, I froze. There was a figure standing in the aisle. Someone in an old-style military uniform was standing over Ming's bed, looking down at him. The moonlight passed through the figure, casting a faint, blurry shadow on the floor. I held my breath, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then, I saw more of them. Figures stood at every bed, all wearing the same old uniforms. They were bent over as if inspecting the sleeping soldiers. Their bodies glowed faintly like dim lanterns in the dark. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. Then, suddenly, all the figures raised their heads at the same time. In perfect unison, they turned like soldiers during morning assembly. Slowly they floated toward the walls, disappearing one by one. The last figure stopped. It turned to look at me, and it smiled. That smile wasn't warm or kind. It was unsettling, like it knew I could see them. Then it passed through the wall and vanished. The next morning, Ming was the first to speak. "Did anyone else have a weird dream last night?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I dreamed someone in an old uniform was standing over my bed." The room fell silent. One by one, others began describing the same dream. Every detail matched exactly. Finally, one of the medics spoke up. He hesitated, then told us the truth. In the 1970s, this building had been a special isolation ward. During Taiwan's economic boom, the military planned to renovate it into a new medical center. But one rainy night, an electrical fire broke out. The flames spread quickly through the old wooden structure. The medic on duty tried to evacuate the patients, but the thick smoke and their weakened conditions made escape impossible. Everyone in the ward perished. When firefighters arrived, they found the bodies lying neatly in their beds as if the patients had been waiting for morning inspection. They were buried in the military cemetery behind the base. After hearing this, none of us wanted to stay in that building anymore. Even with our illnesses, we begged to return to the barracks. The captain eventually agreed, as long as we wore masks and kept our distance from the others. Later, we learned that during every rainy season, strange things happen on base. Soldiers on night duty report hearing footsteps coming from the old medical building, steady, rhythmic, like someone conducting rounds. Every tomb-sweeping day, the base sends people to tend the graves in the military cemetery. The tombstones bear no names, but they say the figures still appear nightly, continuing their endless inspections. Before discharge, those of us who experienced that night would sometimes gather and talk about what happened. Over time, we began to think that maybe those senior officers meant no harm. Maybe they were just fulfilling their final duties, waiting for a morning inspection that would never come. But even now, whenever I remember that last figure, the one that smiled at me, I can't help but feel a chill, because that smile told me they knew I could see them, and this secret would stay with me forever. Man, I still get chills thinking about that night. You know how some memories just stick with you forever? This one, it's burned into my brain, even after all these years. It was winter, and I was stationed at a military base in Kinmen. If you've never been there in winter, let me tell you, it's freezing. The wind from the Taiwan Strait cuts through you like a knife, and the fog. That fog is so thick you can barely see your own hands. That night, I was the officer on duty, working the night shift with two others, Chen, who we called Ace, and Lin, a fresh recruit straight out of training. We were guarding the main gate, stationed in a 2-story concrete watchtower. The place had seen its fair share of history, and, well, probably its fair share of blood, too. It was around 2 a.m., and it had been drizzling for hours. That kind of rain that soaks into your bones. The sodium lights around the watchtower cast these eerie halos in the fog, and visibility was maybe 15 feet, if that. I was downstairs in the guardroom, filling out some reports, when the radio crackled. It was Lin, and his voice, it didn't sound right. "Sir, can you come up here? Right now." I rushed upstairs and found Lin pale as a sheet, shaking like a leaf. This kid had just finished Special Forces training. He was supposed to be tough, but he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" I asked. He whispered, barely audible. Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. Outside there was only the sound of rain and the distant crash of waves. "There's a little girl." His voice trembled. "She keeps whispering in my ear, 'Big brother, come play with me, let's play hopscotch.'" Over and over again. Before I could respond, Ace came running over. He looked even worse than Lin, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Sir," he stammered, "I just saw a little girl. She was wearing one of those old-fashioned white school uniforms, like from the 50s. She was running toward the watchtower, but..." He swallowed hard. "Her feet weren't touching the ground. And then, God help me, I swear this happened, we all heard it. Clear as day. A giggle, a little girl's laugh, sweet and innocent, but the problem was, it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was just around us. Then we heard it, the sound of chalk scraping against concrete, sharp, screeching, and it made my skin crawl. Right in front of us, glowing hopscotch squares started appearing on the ground. They just appeared out of nowhere. And then we heard her song, a soft, sweet voice singing a nursery rhyme. But it wasn't comforting. It was wrong.
Hopscotch, hopscotch. 1, 2, 3. Big brother, come find me, or you'll lose a game. Mommy's waiting at home, but I can't find my way. Who will play with me until the break of day?
We were frozen in place, the three of us huddled together like scared little kids. A gust of wind blew through, clearing some of the fog, and then, oh God, I'll never forget what we saw. There she was, jumping on those glowing squares. 2 neat braids swung with each hop, her white uniform pristine except for the dark, jagged bullet holes. Her face wore a sweet, innocent smile, but her eyes, they were empty, hollow. Like she wasn't really looking at us but through us, and the back of her head, it was shattered, a dark, gaping wound where her skull should have been. The next morning, our sergeant told us the story of that place. Back in 1958, during the artillery battle, this spot used to be an elementary school. One morning, while the kids were playing on the playground, the shelling started. Many of them didn't make it to the bomb shelters in time. That little girl, they called her Xiao Fang, was playing hopscotch with her friends when it happened. Since then, especially on rainy nights, she's been seen. She's looking for someone to play with. She's trying to find her way home. You know what still gives me chills? From that night on, we started leaving candy near the watchtower. Every morning, the candy would be gone, replaced by old-fashioned candy wrappers, the kind they stopped making decades ago. And on rainy nights, those hopscotch squares still appear on the ground. No one draws them. They just show up. I've been out of the military for years now, but every time I visit Kinmen, I bring a bag of candy and leave it near that old watchtower. And on those cold, wet nights, they say you can still hear her song and that whisper.
Big brother, will you play with me?
On the rugged shores of Kinmen, an island fortress nestled between Taiwan and mainland China, lies a labyrinth of military tunnels, carved relentlessly into the heart of solid granite. These tunnels, forged during decades of unyielding military tension, are more than just cold, lifeless passages. They are silent witnesses to history, keepers of secrets, and sometimes vessels for echoes of the past. Among these tunnels there is one that soldiers speak of in hushed tones. At its entrance stands a simple memorial stone, weathered by time and sea breeze. Most might walk past it without a second glance, but for those who know its story, that modest marker holds a chilling reminder of duty, sacrifice, and the unseen. The story takes us back to the 1970s, during the grueling construction of these tunnels. Among the engineering team was a young soldier named Wang, a bright, eager soul who often joked about how he'd leave his mark on Kinmen forever. But one fateful day, during a routine blast, tragedy struck. The granite walls betrayed him, collapsing in an instant and swallowing Wang whole. His comrades dug desperately, their hands raw and bleeding, but the mountain refused to let him go. All they could do was place a simple memorial stone at the site, a silent promise that Wang would never be forgotten. Years passed, and the tunnel was repurposed as a storage facility. But Wang, it seems, never left his post. One cold, moonless night, a young soldier was finishing his inspection rounds in the tunnel. He was the type who scoffed at ghost stories, rolling his eyes whenever the older soldiers spoke of Wang. As he approached the memorial stone, his flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the granite walls. With a smirk, he waved dismissively at the stone and muttered, "Bye-bye," his voice echoing faintly in the empty corridor. But then, just as he turned to leave, he froze. Right next to his ear, so close he could feel the breath of the words, came a soft, cheerful reply. Bye-bye. The voice was warm, almost friendly, like a comrade bidding farewell. But the tunnel was empty. Completely empty. They say he ran faster than any drill sergeant had ever seen, leaving his flashlight behind, his face drained of all color when he reached the barracks. From that night on, the young soldier was never the same. He avoided the tunnel entirely, and whenever asked about what happened, he would only shake his head and mutter, "Don't say goodbye." Since that night, soldiers have learned to treat the memorial with profound respect. No more casual greetings, no more flippant goodbyes. Just a solemn nod as they pass, a silent acknowledgement of the unseen. The old Sergeant Se Wang is still there, standing eternal watch over the tunnel he gave his life to build. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the wind howls through the granite halls, you might hear the faint echoes of digging and hammering, as if Wang is still working, still carving out his place in Kinmen's history. But beware, if you ever dare to say goodbye, don't be surprised if you hear a voice answer back, because in these tunnels some farewells are never truly final.